Observe a forest for a moment. Thousands of seeds fall to the ground every day, but only a few find the perfect conditions for germinating, growing, and becoming majestic trees. This is a universal truth, a perfect reflection of the human reality that you and I face every day. In a world of 8 billion people, why only a few, about 3%, gain extraordinary levels of realization, while the other 97% remain stuck in mediocrity and frustration cycles? The answer is not in the innate talent. It is not in luck or in the circumstances of birth. The fundamental difference, the only truly decisive variable, lies in the invisible power of deliberate thinking, in the ability to consciously program the mind for greatness, while the rest of the world allows their minds to be accidentally programmed by collective mediocrity. Think about it for a moment. Its brain is the most sophisticated biological computer in the known universe. Every second, it processes billions of information bits, creating your reality experience. And just as a computer can only run the program that has been installed, your mind manifests exactly what you program in it. Nothing more, nothing less. This is the unchanging principle that Earl Nightingale has discovered and condensed at its most powerful maxim. We become what we think. But there is a crucial detail that many ignore. Distracted, casual, and reactive thinking, one that occupies 97% of minds, has no transformative power. It is just deliberate, focused, and sustained thinking that shapes extraordinary realities. It is the difference between a lens that disperses light in all directions and one that concentrates it in a single point, capable of lighting a flame. Look around you right now. Every object you see, the device you are watching this video, the chair in which you are sitting, the building that houses it, began as a sustained thought in someone's mind. First existed as an idea, then as a plan, and finally as a tangible reality. This is the inevitable trajectory of all human creation without exception. Have you ever wondered why some people seem to magnetize opportunities and achievements, while others, equally talented, remain invisible to success? The answer lies in the vibratory quality of thought. When you deliberately think with unstoppage and unshakable conviction, your mind emits a specific frequency that reorganizes the field of potentiality around you. Consider Alexander Fleming. In 1928, he noted that a mold had contaminated his bacteria cultures, killing them. Where thousands of other scientists would have seen only a ruined experiment, Fleming saw a medical revolution. The difference? It was not the external event. The mold would be there regardless of whoever observed. It was deliberate thinking that turned an accidental failure into the discovery of penicillin, later saving millions of lives. The same principle applies to your life right now. The external circumstances are just the stage. The script, direction, and main role are determined by the quality of their deliberate thinking, and it leads us to the most liberating truth of all. You don't have to change the whole world to transform your life. You just need to change your inner world. But let's be honest, this is not an easy way. If it were, everyone would be extraordinary, and the extraordinary would become common. Deliberate thinking requires fierce discipline and unshakable courage. It requires you to challenge consensus, to refuse to accept the limitations that others consider realistic. Imagine yourself now as the sculptor of your own life. The raw material is unlimited, the infinite marble of possibility. Most people take this precious material and deliver it to external sculptors. Alien opinions, passing circumstances, inherited fears. The exceptional 3%, however, assume full control of the chisel. They deliberately sculpt, trace the trace, thought to thought. In ancient Rome, the sculptors believed they were not creating the statue, but releasing the form that already existed within the marble. Similarly, deliberate thinking does not create its potential. It reveals it. Your greatness already exists within you, waiting only for the caught. I need the thought focus to emerge. Reflect on people who have changed the course of human history. From Gandhi to Einstein, from Marie Curie to Nelson Mandela, everyone shared a feature: the refusal to accept the limits of conventional thinking. When Gandhi stated that it would be possible to free India without violence, he was ridiculed. Collective thinking considered it impossible. But Gandhi did not consult the external consensus. He consulted his inner view, sustained by deliberate and unshakable thinking. What are you consulting in your own life? External consensus or your internal view? The answer to this question will determine if you will remain between 97% or ascend to the extraordinary 3%. The crucial difference between these two groups is not in gross intellectual capacity, but in the application of this capacity. 97% use their mental potential especially to justify limitations. Why they can't, why it's very difficult, why it's too late. The 3% direct exactly the same potential to identify possibilities. How can you, what paths there are, what resources can mobilize? Visualize two individuals before the same obstacle. The first says, it's impossible to cross this barrier. The second question, how can I cross this barrier? The first has already ended the mental process, while the second only started it. This simple difference in the quality of the active question that is completely different neural circuits and accesses different mental resources. Here is a secret that the 3% know intimately. Your subconscious mind does not question the commands you receive from the conscious mind. It simply executes them with relentless accuracy. When you declare inwardly, "This is impossible for me," your subconscious mobilizes resources to confirm this belief. When you ask, "How can I do this?" he redirects these same features to find solutions. Thomas Edison faced more than 10,000 failed attempts before improving the incandescent lamp. For the common mind, this would represent 10,000 evidence of impossibility. For Edison, there were 10,000 discoveries on how not to make a lamp each approaching it to the final solution. The difference was not in external events, but in the deliberate interpretation of these events. This is the transforming power of deliberate thinking in action. It is the ability to reinterpret each experience not as a final proof, but as valuable feedback. It is the profound understanding that your outer reality will always reorganize to reflect your most consistent thoughts. Most people expect reality to change first and then change their thoughts. They say, "When I succeed, I'll think like a successful person." This is exactly the reason why they remain trapped where they are. Mental physics works in the opposite direction. When I consistently think as a successful person, success will manifest itself in my experience. The universe responds not to what you want, expects, or even deserves. It responds to what you believe in the deepest level and expressed through your usual thoughts. This is the most liberating truth and, at the same time, the most demanding you will find on your journey. Consider water in its 3 states: solid, liquid, and gaseous. The same substance assumes completely different characteristics depending on the energy applied to its molecules. Your thinking works identically. Casual thinking is like solid state, static, rigid, resistant to change. Reactive thinking is like liquid water, flowing through the path of less resistance, assuming the shape of the container that contains it. But the deliberate thinking? This is like vapor, energized, expansive, capable of generating enough strength to move whole machines. It is mental state that ignores apparent limitations and transcends current conditions. It is the state that 3% cultivate consistently, while 97% experience it only in rare moments of inspiration. The crucial question is, how can you transition from casual and reactive thinking to deliberate and transforming thinking? How can you leave the 97% group and enter the 3% circle? The process begins with a decision, not a casual preference or a vague desire, but a definitive decision. The word decision comes from Latin and literally means cutting out. A true decision cuts all possibilities except one. It eliminates any plan B that offers a convenient escape route. When Alexander the Great reached the beaches of Persia with his army, he ordered all ships to be burned. Faced with the astonished looks of his generals, he explained, "We will now win because we have nowhere to run away." This is the mindset that separates the extraordinary from the common, the willingness to eliminate mediocre alternatives and fully commit to a high vision. Observe your own life right now. Where have you kept convenient escape routes? Where have you nourished ready-to-failure explanations before you even try it? These are the areas where deliberate thinking has been replaced by elaborate excuses. The extraordinary 3% have no better explanations for failure. They simply refuse to consider it as the final option. They understand that failure is not the opposite of success, it is its integral part. It's a teacher, not an executioner. It's a deviation, not a final destination. Henry Ford failed 5 businesses before founding Ford Motor Company. Walt Disney was fired from a newspaper for lack of imagination. Oprah Winfrey was considered inappropriate for television on her first job. What differentiated them was not the absence of failures, but the refusal to allow these failures to define the limit of their possibilities. Deliberate thinking transforms the meaning of failure. For the ordinary mind, failing means I am a failure. For the extraordinary mind, fail only, this specific approach did not work. The first interpretation contains possibilities, the second multiplies them. Here is an exercise that can start its transition to the extraordinary 3%. For 7 consecutive days, strictly monitor their patterns of thought. Note when you are thinking reactively, automatically responding to the environment, and when you are deliberately thinking, consciously choosing mental focus. The simple awareness of these standards already begins their transformation. But deliberate thinking is not just in mind. It needs to be anchored in physical reality through consistent action. Many confuse positive thinking with deliberate thinking. The difference is abysmal. Positive thinking without action is just elaborate fantasy. Deliberate thinking, on the other hand, always translates into concrete steps. When you deliberately think of a goal, your mind not only views the desired result, it automatically begins to calculate the next viable step. This is the hallmark of the extraordinary 3%. They keep their vision great while remaining intensely focused on the next immediate action. Imagine an archer. To hit the target, he must keep 2 focuses simultaneously, the eye on the distant goal and the absolute consciousness of the arrow in his hands. Losing any of these focuses compromises the result. Similarly, deliberate thinking maintains the final view while remaining totally engaged in the present moment. Most people oscillate between extremes. Either it is so fixed on the goal that it is disconnected from the necessary steps, or is so absorbed in daily tasks that it loses sight of the greater purpose. The 3% extraordinary cultivate the perfect balance between these poles: vision and execution, the horizon and the next step, the macro and the micro. This balance is sustained by a practice that all exceptional filmmakers share: deliberate immersion. Not only do they think of their goals occasionally, they submerge their conscience in them daily. Read on the subject, talk about it, visualize it in vivid details, and above all, act consistently toward you. Neuroscientists have found that this deliberate immersion activates the brain's reticular activating system, SAR, the mechanism that filters billions of information bits and allows only the most relevant to their current goals to achieve their consciousness. When you program your SAR through deliberate thinking, it literally sees opportunities that have always been there, but were invisible to your previous perception. It's like buying a new car of a particular brand and color, and it suddenly noticed how many identical cars there are on the streets. Cars that have always been there, but they had no relevance to their mental radar. The same phenomenon occurs with opportunities, resources, and connections related to your goals. Deliberate thinking is, therefore, a focus mechanism that reorients its entire perceptual system. It's not just about thinking positively, it's about reprogramming your own filters through which you experience reality. Think about the great visions of history. When John F. Kennedy declared in 1961 that the United States would put a man on the moon until the end of that decade, there was no technology available to accomplish such a feat. Most experts considered the deadline impossible. But Kennedy was not just making a forecast, he was setting a direction for the collective deliberate thinking of thousands of scientists and engineers. The result? On July 20, 1969, Neil Armstrong stepped on the lunar surface, transforming what seemed impossible into historical reality. This is the power of deliberate thinking when amplified by focused action and unshakable persistence. Now apply this understanding to your own life. Which areas have remained stagnant, not for lack of capacity, but for lack of deliberate thinking? Where have you accepted limitations that exist only in your perception, not in objective reality? The inconvenient truth that 97% avoid is this: their current circumstances are the precise result of their predominant thoughts so far. If you want different circumstances, you should cultivate different thoughts, not casually, not sporadically, but deliberately and persistently. The transition to deliberate thinking begins with crystalline clarity. You must define exactly what you want in specific and measurable terms. The mind cannot manifest foggy targets. I want to be successful is too vague intent to mobilize all the power of deliberate thinking. I want to build a business that manages $50,000 monthly offering solutions that turn the lives of 1,000 customers a year. This is a direction that the brain can sue and execute. But clarity by itself is not enough. Deliberate thinking requires consistent repetition until the new direction becomes the dominant pattern of your mind. Research in neuroplasticity demonstrates that our physical brain reorganizes according to our thinking patterns. New neural connections are formed and strengthened, while old connections, unused, weaken and eventually disappear. This process of neural reconstruction does not happen instantly. It requires deliberate and persistent repetition. This is why many people give up prematurely. They do not support the new pattern of thought for the time to become their new dominant neural configuration. The extraordinary 3% profoundly comprise this principle. Not only do they decide to think differently, they create systems that guarantee the consistent repetition of these new standards until they become automatic. They use daily statements, guided view, immersion in inspiring material, and most importantly, consistent action that reinforces the new mindset. Consider Michael Jordan, widely recognized as the greatest basketball player of all time. What few know is that Jordan was cut from the basketball team in high school. That moment could have defined its identity and established a limit to its possibilities, as with the 97%. Instead, Jordan used that experience as a fuel for a new pattern of deliberate thinking. He practiced throwing for hours after everyone had already left the gym. But more significant than physical practice was their deliberate inner dialogue. Jordan did not allow a single event to define his identity as an athlete. He deliberately chose a different interpretation. That cut didn't mean he was inappropriate, it meant only that he was not ready yet, but it would certainly be. This is the transforming power of deliberate thinking in action. It is the ability to consciously choose the meaning of each experience, especially those that seem limiting at first glance. It is the deep understanding that those who define meaning control the result. Most people allow external events to define their thoughts, which in turn define their emotions, actions, and finally their results. The 3% extraordinary reverse this equation. They choose their thoughts deliberately, regardless of external circumstances, knowing that these thoughts will eventually reorganize their own circumstances. This is not a fanciful philosophy. It is a practical application of the laws of mental physics. Just as a gardener does not question the law of germination when planting a seed, you do not need to question the law of deliberate thinking. Planting consistently thoughts of possibility, abundance and solution, and the corresponding harvest is inevitable, not by magic, but by the precise operation of universal principles. A frequently neglected aspect of deliberate thinking is its emotional component. The thoughts that generate strong emotional response have multiplied power. This is why purely intellectual statements rarely produce substantial changes. For deliberate thinking to reach its maximum potential, it must be energized by genuine emotion. When Martin Luther King Jr. declared, "I have a dream," I was not just articulating an intellectual concept, I was expressing an impregnated view of deep emotional conviction. This combination of mental clarity and emotional intensity creates the kind of deliberate thinking that literally reorganizes collective reality. You can apply the same principle on a personal scale. It is not enough to define logically coherent goals, they must resonate emotionally. They must connect to their deeper values, what you consider sacred in your existence. When deliberate thinking aligns with its authentic essence, its power multiplies exponentially. Extraordinary 3% understand that deliberate thinking is not just a mental technique, it is a way of living. They align their physical environments, social circles, and daily habits to reinforce, not sabotage, their chosen mental patterns. They recognize that the mind, though infinitely powerful, is also highly influenced by the outer context. If you want to move to this select group, critically examine these three aspects of your life. Does your physical environment inspire excellence or mediocrity? Do your social connections raise or decrease your standards? Do your daily habits reinforce or contradict your declared goals? Truly deliberate thinking requires congruence in all these dimensions. Here is a truth that 97% prefer to ignore. You cannot think as a victim and live as a creator. You cannot nourish thoughts of scarcity and manifest abundance. You cannot focus on and find paths. The incongruity between thought and the desired result is precisely what keeps the majority trapped in cycles of frustration and mediocrity. The 3% extraordinary cultivate impeccable internal congruence. His inner dialogue, his public statements, his daily actions, and their strategic decisions, all aligned in perfect harmony with his chosen vision. This congruence does not occur accidentally. It is the result of deliberate thinking consistently applied to each dimension of life. This is the invitation you receive right now, the opportunity to make the definitive transition from casual and reactive thinking to deliberate and transforming thinking, the opportunity to leave the 97% herd and enter the extraordinary 3% community, not by luck, not by circumstance, but by conscious choice and deliberate action. The path will not be easy. You will face internal and external resistance. Old patterns will try to resume control. The environment will try to push it back to collective mediocrity. This is why most fail in this transition, not for lack of knowledge, but for lack of persistence when confronted with the inevitable friction of change. But you have an advantage that few recognize: the awareness of the process. You now understand that deliberate thinking is not just a motivational technique, it is a precise mechanism to transform reality. You know that your current mind has been programmed over time and can be reprogrammed through the same process, now consciously applied, not accidentally. Winston Churchill noted that the pessimist sees difficulty in every opportunity. The optimist sees opportunity in every difficulty. But there is a third category, superior to both, the deliberate thinker, who not only recognizes opportunities, but creates them through the quality of his mental focus. This is your invitation to transcend limiting categories and assume conscious control of the most powerful resource in the universe, your deliberate attention. Where you consistently direct your attention, the energy flows. Where energy flows, the manifestation follows. The moment for this transition is not tomorrow. It is not when the conditions are perfect. It is not when you are ready. The moment is right now, as these words still resonate in their conscience. Because at every moment you are choosing, deliberately or by default, the thoughts that will shape your next experience. Choose deliberately. Choose consciously. Choose as if your reality depended on it. Because, in fact, it depends. The extraordinary 3% journey begins with a single decision, the decision to take the power of deliberate thinking seriously, to treat it not as an abstract concept, but as the practical transformation tool it really is, to apply it not sporadically, but as a fundamental philosophy of life. This decision is available to you now. It does not require special features, privileged connections, or exceptional talents. It only requires the willingness to take full responsibility for the content of your mind and the determination to direct this content deliberately towards your chosen view. The 3% are not an exclusive club with unreachable requirements. It is simply those who have chosen to live according to the most fundamental truth of human existence. You become what you think consistently. This truth is available equally to everyone, but is applied diligently only by a few. Be one of the few. Not for pride or separation, but by the expansive impact that its realization will have about everyone around it. The world no more people living lives of silent despair. It needs living examples of human potential fully expressed through the power of deliberate thinking. The choice is yours, as it always was. And the moment is now.